always wanted to know what a neuropsychologist was about. So I went to the well and found my very own neuropsychologist. His name is Mathew Staios, and he has a brand new book. We're going to talk about it. Matt, welcome to The Informer.
Thanks for having me on, George.
So tell me about neuropsychology. What's it all about?
We are experts in assessing brain behaviour relationships. So an example would be for somebody that's elderly that might have dementia, suspected anyway. They get referred to us, and our job is to determine whether or not they fall into that category. So we do a lot of history taking, like a psychologist would, to look at early development, psychological issues, education, which provides us with a bit of a benchmark. So it gives us an indication of where they kind of sit. And we use the word pre-morbid functioning to define what they would have been like prior to the onset of a disease. Tell me,
it must be extraordinarily difficult because we see in dementia cases people who have moments of clarity.
Yes.
They come out and for minutes, moments, for quite some time, it can vary, are who they were, and then suddenly they go back into that fog. That must add another layer of complexity to you trying to assess them.
I think,
or is it like a window?
Well, I think the best way to describe that is, on a dark, stormy day, the clouds clearing, sun streaming through, and you get an idea of what that person was, at a particular moment in their life that they weren't afflicted with this particular disorder. It can be quite challenging, particularly for family members, seeing the person that once was and grieving the person that they were and observing the person that they become. So it's a challenging thing to have to go through.
We're going through a tough time in Australia at the moment. The whole world is going through a pretty tough time, where we're seeing, especially in our older communities, our aged care sector taking a fearful hit. A number of our most fragile, most vulnerable, have lost their lives, have been really affected by the COVID pandemic. Some of these facilities, some of these homes, some of these institutions should have done a better job, because Lord knows we gave them enough warning. Europe gave us a sense of what was coming. Why did we take so long to get acquainted with the pandemic? And why did it take us so long to start doing anything that remotely was the right thing to protect our aged people in their various homes around the country, not just in Victoria?
Yeah, look, I'm going to answer this question in two parts.
Go on.
First of all, the notion of a pandemic, even for me, sitting at home in Australia in late December, watching it rapidly unfold in Wuhan, the concept of a pandemic hitting developed English-speaking first world nations, it's unfathomable, because we live with a certain sense of privilege and, dare I say, a very large chip on our shoulders. Things like this simply don't happen here. It's all about a sense of entitlement and privilege. Things like that happen over there. And when I say over there, where pandemics have generally, are blown out of proportion, countries like Asia, where we've seen H1N1 and a range of other diseases, rapidly unfold. It's stuff that happens over there. We don't necessarily associate that type of, occurrence with English-speaking Western developed nations. Because
so what happened when it moved to Italy, and we saw it ravage Italy like never before?
Again, it doesn't happen in English-speaking countries. We have the facilities there. It could happen in Italy. They're not as progressive as we are. They don't have the facilities to deal with these types of issues. We are, in essence, when I say we, I mean that in the broader sense of that word. We are better. We can do better. We, Australia, America, England, I would say.
Do we suffer a cringe? Do we suffer from a cultural cringe?
I would say yes. I would say that, we think that we are the leaders. We think that we're better. We think that we certainly provide...
What do we base that on?
Well, I think it's about, America being, the last, or, a crumbling superpower now, I guess, leading by example. But what example have they been leading by over the past, 30 or 40 years? I think I think the best example I can give you here is it's like tuning into a show that's shot in, you know, Hollywood or Los Angeles, where you really see the great parts to it. You see the palm trees, you see the sunshine, you see the beautiful stores. As somebody that's been to LA quite a few times, as I'm sure you have as well, once you get out of those outskirts, you really see what a broken country it is.
Exactly
how
right.
there are so many underprivileged, you know, individuals living in that country that don't reap the benefits that a very, very small majority do. So it's kind of interesting when you start to peel back the layers or scratch the surface, and all you see is more surface.
When you put it like that, it fills you with a dread, because we should be better. We should be better informed than ever in our history. And yet it seems to me that although we have all these answers at the tip of our fingers, we have not mustered any wisdom to go along with it.
What's that old saying? Denial is not just a river in Egypt. Unfortunately, we don't want to face the inevitable, particularly when it comes to something like a pandemic. You know, having you know, the luxury, the privilege of, you know, scrolling through our phones, booking a trip on Skyscanner, being able to leave the country at the drop of a penny. These privileges have been taken away from us now, and we have time to reflect, or we should have some time to reflect on how great life actually was in those particular moments. Was, yes, yes, and still has the potential to be.
Yes.
We just need to work out, you know, you hear all these new terms being thrown out like COVID normal, the new norm, the new world order. Leaving all of those descriptors aside, life as we know it has changed.
Why are we so good at stereotyping things? Do we have this absolute need in our makeup to put things into a box? Because I remember in my early days in television, they said, oh, no, don't do anything else, you're a newsreader. Yeah? I said, but I want to do sport. No, you're a newsreader. They want to put you into a box. Is it part of our DNA?
Isn't it?
We want to put everything in a box, in a compartment?
Isn't it easier to categorise and label to help us make sense of the crazy world around us? I spent most of my 20s living out of a backpack and travelling across the world, and it was the best thing that I could have done for myself. I think
because it gave you a range of experiences.
Well, it gave me an appreciation of different cultures. It gave me an appreciation of perspective taking, and I think that is lacking, generally speaking, more broadly speaking, of course. I think the individuals that I surround myself with tend to be quite diverse. I think I'm probably the only, you know, scientist, you know, sort of practitioner in my friendship group, which is, you know, great for me because I bring a different flavour to the group in terms of thinking. You know,
no one's hogging the limelight. I love it.
Well, sorry, what was that?
No one's hogging the limelight.
No. Yeah, absolutely. But you know, I think those formative years for me, you know, not relying on my parents, living out of a backpack, you know, not bathing for a couple of days on end because I was on a train travelling through a country.
You also cut the umbilical cord. That's a big deal. In terms of our development and advancement.
And in terms of our cultural background.
The longer you hold onto that umbilical cord, the tougher it is to make the break.
Absolutely. And I think this is particularly reflected in the Greek culture per se, where, you know, and I'm the youngest of 4 boys, so, you know, having to, absolutely. So, you know, pressure's on. Particularly to define myself, you know, within the construct of my family and, you know, amongst, you know, 3 other strong personalities.
So the difference between your eldest and the youngest, you're the youngest.
Yeah.
How many years between you and your eldest brother?
10.
Wow, that's a substantial difference.
Yeah. So I came along.
So how do you see him? Is he like an uncle, or is he like a brother?
I think I had 4 older fathers growing up. So there's a 7-year gap between me and number 3, so I guess you could say that I was a child that wasn't, you know, necessarily planned but made out of love.
So is this why you've done the book? Is this to give your forefathers a chance to catch up?
I think writing a book on the psychology, more broadly speaking, of Greek Australians and how to properly assess them in terms of, you know, diagnosing dementia and looking at all those particular building blocks and knowing what to look out for. When I was in my late teens, I tried to emancipate myself from my cultural background as much as I possibly could, and I didn't really have a good understanding as to why I tried to do it. I just knew it wasn't cool to be a wog back then. there was that stereotype that was pushed, wogs, equal.
Yeah.
So many negative things.
And you resisted, you wanted to fight it.
So, like I said, I packed a bag when I was 20. I backpacked through the Middle East for about 3 months by myself, which was, I guess, a little risque, particularly back then as a naive 20-year-old kid.
What did you learn early on, taking those risks?
It was more about a yearning and wanting to scratch the surface, a romanticised notion of what life was and different places were. I went through Egypt, I went through Lebanon, I went through Syria, I went through Israel, and I went through Jordan as well. So I got to see so many amazing things.
Now, you've touched on a number of places that I've visited.
Yep.
When I went to Israel,
yep.
one thing I didn't want to do is create an expectation. I wanted just to go there and to visit Jerusalem, the wall city.
Yeah.
And whatever I found, that was going to be it. Did you have expectations before you went?
So this is a little embarrassing to admit. I actually backpacked through the Middle East because my brother Angelo said that I couldn't hack it. I wouldn't be able to deal with it, so I kind of did it as a bit of a up yours. I'm going to do this and I'm going to do it for longer than you did. And in that process, I met some really great people. I also became acquainted with the richness of Greek culture and how far and wide it actually spread. So,
do you speak fluent Greek?
I did, yes.
Okay.
I do, sorry, yes,
yeah.
yes.
And did you find that the rest of the world could make some sense of this young Australian Greek or Greek Australian who was prepared to challenge himself and his brothers?
I would say that they certainly identified with the Australian aspect of me, and I think, in terms of me understanding myself within the context of my heritage and the Australian landscape, I think that's always been a little bit difficult. I think I've always struggled with my cultural identity. I don't necessarily feel like I fit in Australia, whereas, when I go to Greece, I feel that my personality is much more reflected in some of their cultural ways of being and thinking, but at the same time I find it completely frustrating because parts of me are very much Australian, so it's kind of hard.
They see you as the Xeno, the Australian,
interestingly,
or they accept you as the Greek?
Interestingly, I had a conversation with a cab driver in Athens, and I said, I'm from Australia, I'm an Australian. He said, no, you're not, your blood is Greek, you are Greek, you're just as Greek as we are. So they're very, very quick to embrace individuals of Greek background that have been raised in foreign nations. And to me, I don't know if that happens in a lot of other places. I feel like, take France, for example, they have a really, really strong allegiance. They don't see French Canadians as being French, they see them as being French Canadians. There's that real distinction there. Correct. But I think it's something that's inherent and unique to Greek culture. They're really quick to embrace people. They're very, very quick to, open their arms and their homes. Yes.
That wonderful friendship for strangers is just exceptional, isn't it?
And it's certainly echoed in the wider diaspora, where, at the moment I'm trying to extend some of my research into the United States, and, some of the people that I've touched base with are so excited to see somebody from a younger, or in my case, not so young anymore, but somebody from a younger generation wanting to actually contribute to the Greek culture, more broadly speaking, in terms of assessing or helping to provide a better quality of care to the elders. So I feel like we're a little more unique in that aspect. I can't speak for other cultures, but in my experience, it certainly has been the case dealing with Greeks and the wider diaspora throughout the world. Let me get controversial.
The Elgin marbles, the Parthenon marbles, do they deserve to come back or should they stay in London?
Do a lot of relics that have been stolen by a number of other cultures deserve to be back in their homeland?
Egypt.
Absolutely.
Louvre. Yep.
Absolutely.
Should they come back?
Absolutely. I believe that the Queen has a jewel from Egypt that's been embedded in one of her tiaras. So that was stolen from I think it was India.
But that's
back
what
in the day.
Empires did in those days. They could plunder, they could seek their fortune wherever they had the mastery and the seas and the power of the gun. It's been like that for centuries, hasn't it?
It has raping, pillaging,
and plundering.
It doesn't make it right, and I think setting a precedent like returning the Parthenon marbles would certainly send a really big echo across the world, and
it would shake the very foundations of the Louvre.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely.
And we must say, and the Met Museum in New York is just exceptional. They are extraordinary warehouses or museums of great art and of great history. And I'm just wondering if we give them back, or if we give some of the great treasures back, what will be left of them? Maybe we make them new hotels.
Well, here's an idea.
Yeah.
Why don't they travel the world so everybody has a privilege of seeing them, and they're not necessarily housed in one location?
Like the Benaki Museum does for their many Greek antiquities that they have, and we've seen them at the Hellenic Museum in Melbourne.
Yes.
And they are very special when you see the range of antiquities and the age, 6,500 years we're talking. That's quite something to behold. It's
quite significant.
It is. It's wonderful. Yeah. Let's pause this conversation because we're going to continue. We're talking to neuropsychologist Mathew Staios about a new book that we haven't even broached just yet.